You guys help me remember. If somebody asks a question, help me to remember to repeat it because the people online can't actually hear it. But my brain gets so focused on my teaching that I forget everything outside of the teaching. All right, chapter 30, verse 14. In the days of wheat harvest, Reuben went and found mandrakes in the field and brought them to his mother Leah. Then Rachel said to Leah, "Please give me some of your son's mandrakes." But she said to her, "Is it a small matter that you have taken away my husband? Would you take away my son's mandrakes also?" These women have a great relationship. Rachel said, "Then he may lie with you tonight in exchange for your son's mandrakes." When Jacob came from the field in the evening, Leah went out to meet him and said, "You must come in to me, for I have hired you with my son's mandrakes." So he lay with her that night. All right. So this is what they're talking about. I don't know if you're familiar with a mandrake, but it's interesting. What does it kind of look like? Looks like a person. And most of the roots are like this. And that's why all through history, mandrake plants have always been considered mystical, magical, because they look like a person. And so in this particular instance, they believe that the mandrake plant will cause her to have children. And most of the times with the mandrake, it's actually quite poisonous and will make you deathly ill if you eat it. But what they usually did with it was like they'd put it under the bed or something like that. And then that was supposed to help get her pregnant. Remember, this is, hey, there's still people today that believe that stuff. Just go over to Sedona and talk to a few. They'll tell you all kinds of great stuff. But that is what they think. That was what was common in their day. So, Rachel hasn't had any children. And so she's hoping this will work. But it's Leah owns them, So it's believed, the mandrake is believed to have all kinds of magical powers, good and bad, and all this type of stuff. And it was commonly used as a fertility aid, Now, there's nothing in it to cause a woman to get pregnant, but of course that never stopped anybody from the past till today with, holistic medicines, all that. And when I come to like holistic medicine, some work, a lot don't. And I knew a pastor once that I liked the way he put it. He said, humans do not come up with answers to questions they haven't asked. What he meant was you don't find a solution to a problem you don't have. And what he's getting at is if that Eastern medicine and natural medicine, if it was so effective, we'd have never created Western medicine. We wouldn't have had an issue. We'd have just continued with the natural medicine. But apparently it didn't. Therefore, we came up with Western medicine. But there are some natural remedies that do work and are very effective. But there's, how all things are. They get hyped up to where, today's world, natural medicine will cure everything. And unfortunately, it doesn't.
Then there's that saying, don't throw the cat out with the bathwater.
Right. Yeah, for a long time we went totally, all natural medicine's no good, only Western medicine. And now we've got doctors that are kind of finding the best of both worlds. Because there are some natural medicines that work well and have very low side effects, and there's other things. Western medicine is the only thing that works. Like, we still have nothing natural that can really deal with an infection. That's antibiotics. There's a few things, like some silver things would work and a few things like that, but not a lot. So anyway, that's the whole idea here. She's going to get pregnant. Again, where's Rachel looking for answers?
In the world.
Everywhere but God. It seems like. Now, you'll find in a little bit as we go through the scripture that she is praying. But I think her prayers are in the wrong direction. She needs to be asking God why she's not having kids as opposed to give me kids. Because we know that a lot of it has to do with the treatment of Leah, the way that she's treated by both Rachel. Because remember, God said that. He saw how Leah was being treated, so he gave her children and didn't give Rachel children. But Rachel is going to have some kids in a little bit. Now, Leah feels that Rachel has stolen her husband. She says that. And if you think about it, she was married to Jacob for 7 years. Just her and Jacob. And so, that's who he slept with, and that's who his relationship was with. But as soon as Rachel came along, what happened? All of a sudden, Leah is put out in the back 40, and it's just Rachel all the time. And in fact, she has to work out a deal with Rachel in order to get Jacob to come sleep with her, which is interesting to me. So Rachel bargains with Leah to get the mandrakes, but who's the boss? Nope. Rachel. Who decides who Jacob's going to sleep with? Rachel. You know, because she works the deal out with Leah. So, you know, it's Rachel who controls Jacob and who he spends time with, you know, and it shows the power and position that Rachel has in the family. We also find that Jacob basically goes along with whatever she wants to do. We talked about that last week, about the passivity of him. And unfortunately, with too many men, when it comes to men in the Christian world, being passive. And that's what he's doing here. You know, I mean, think of it. He comes walking in from the fields, and Leah meets him out front and says, "You have to sleep with me tonight. I hired you."
What?
You know, and Jacob just goes, "Okay." I think I'd have been, hold on a minute. You know, wait a minute here. Nobody's hiring me. It's like, you know, Rachel's the pimp and he's the prostitute. You know, and she's hiring him out, kind of thing. But he goes along with it. So, what's that?
No man would say no.
Well, I know, he is a man. You know, but it's just the way that I think I would have had a problem with.
Yeah.
You know. So, and we wonder why the Israelites were pretty messed up through their entire history. Well, it started at the very beginning. You know, like right here with this nonsense that's going on. So what does Jacob do? Does he get upset and say, "How dare you hire me out?" Blah, blah. No. He just goes in, sleeps with her, and goes on about life. So it's really kind of odd. Verse 17. And God listened to Leah, okay, and she conceived and bore Jacob a fifth son. Leah said, "God has given me my wages because I gave my servant to my husband." So she thinks God gave her this kid because she gave her servant to him to have kids. Very different way of thinking. So she called his name Issachar. And Leah conceived again, and she bore Jacob a sixth son. Then Leah said, "God has endowed me with a good endowment. Now my husband will honor me because I have borne him 6 sons." So she called his name Zebulun. Afterward, she bore a daughter and called her name Dinah. So again, God causes Leah to conceive. She's got a 5th son, and he came about because she hired her husband's service. Therefore, she names him Issachar, which sounds like hired. How would you like to go through life with that name? Being reminded of how you came into existence. My mom hired my dad to sleep with her. You know. So, all right. It's hard to imagine. All right. Leah becomes pregnant, has another son. She's got 6 now. So she is the mother of half of the beginning of the nation of Israel. And then through her servant that also had sons, she ends up with 8 of them. So God does bless her. She ends up, and they're all sons, which is a huge deal. And that's why she said, "God has endowed me with a good endowment, 6 sons. Now Jacob will look to me and, you know, think highly of me," and all of that's pretty true. Now he still loved Rachel more, but that gives her a high position in the family to have 6 sons. And in all the peoples around them. And his name is Zebulun, which sounds like honor. God has honored me, is what she said. And so she gives him the name Honor. So then we get the little snippet. What have I told you about when the Bible refers to a woman by name? What does that tell us? She's important. She's going to come up in other information later on. And Dinah does. She comes up as important later on in the story. Quite a bit later on. But if you remember the story, what happens with Dinah is they come to the outside of Shechem, and one of the young men, the son of the chief or the king of Shechem, wants Dinah, and he goes out and rapes her. And so then the sons of Jacob come to the city and say, you know, you did this, and the punishment is you all have to get circumcised. And because Israel's a fairly powerful group already, they do. Do you remember what happens after that? They come in the next day when the men can't get up and move and kill them all. And so they do this tricky thing and they murder all the men in the city. So it kind of shows you where Israel begins. And we shouldn't wonder why it doesn't get a whole lot better, continue on down through their history. You know, they're kind of a mess as a people. But are they that different than any of the rest of us? Not really. A little bit, but not really. So we know that she's going to be important later on. And again, as I said many times, it reminds us of the position of women in the Old Testament. They don't really get mentioned unless there's something specific dealing with them that's going to affect the people of Israel. All right, verse 22. God finally remembers Rachel. Then God remembered Rachel, and God listened to her and opened her womb. Remember I said she must be praying, because here it says God listened to her. Now we're not told what she's praying, but she's praying. Also trying to do it on her own at the same time. She conceived and bore a son and said, God has taken away my reproach. And she called his name Joseph, saying, may the Lord add to me another son. So Joseph sounds like taken away. That's what his name refers to, that her reproach has been taken away. So she's been crying out to God, give me children, give me children, give me children, all that kind of stuff. She should have been saying, why am I not having children? And perhaps God would have responded to her in that. But she finally has a son. Verse 25. As soon as Rachel had borne Joseph, Jacob said to Laban, send me away, that I may go to my own home and country. Give me my wives and my children, for whom I have served you, that I may go. Where am I? For I may go, for you know the service that I have given you. But Laban said to him, if I have found favor in your sight,
Sorry.
Please put that on the camera. You can put it down later. But Laban said to him, if I have found favor in your sight, I have learned by divination that the Lord has blessed me because of you. Name your wages, and I will give it. Jacob said to him, you yourself know how I have served you, and how your livestock has fared with me. For you had little before I came, and it has increased abundantly. And the Lord has blessed you wherever I turned. But now when shall I provide for my own household also? I mean, he's been there working for a minimum of 14 years without pay. Well, I mean, his pay is 2 wives. And we've gone on past that because they've had quite a few kids, and now Rachel's had a kid, so we don't know the exact time frame, but I'm going to guess it's at least 20 plus years. And yet he has nothing of his own. Everything still belongs to Laban. And so he finally says it's time. And so it's time for him to go home. Let's see. And he knows that God has blessed Laban because of him. When he came, Laban didn't have a whole lot. He had some flocks and stuff, but they weren't real big. Now they're huge because God's blessed him, and because Jacob is a very hard worker, and he's very good at taking care of animals. He's got a real heart to take care of animals. He's very concerned, very attentive, and he takes very good care of them. So it's both of those. And now he wants to go, but Laban realizes where'd all of his wealth come from? Jacob. If Jacob goes, the wealth goes. So he wants him to stay. So now he's offering to pay him. I'll pay you. Whatever you want, I'll pay you. But at the same time, what do we know about Laban? He's a liar, a cheater, and a trickster. So he doesn't have any problem with paying him because he's going to try to cheat him out of it, is what's going to happen. That's why he says, name anything. When somebody says that, you already know you're in trouble because they have no plans of giving you anything, that type of thing. So, and it's because of God blessing Jacob that he's blessed Laban. Now, something interesting is Laban says he learned by divination that it is because of Jacob that his herds have grown. I'm not really sure why he had to go to divination. Before Jacob, herds didn't grow. Jacob comes, herds grow. Only one thing changed. So it'd be fairly easy to figure out. It doesn't tell us what kind of divination. But it does show us, as I said last week, that they're mixing together false gods and God. They're still clinging to the gods of the Chaldeans where they came from, or what we might call the Babylonian gods, although they're actually Chaldean. It gets mixed around a lot between those two. And so he uses some kind of divination. Is the Bible does God want us to use divination? Not really. The only time that we find anything close to that is, remember the Urim and the Thummim? I don't know if you're familiar with those. Those are used in the Old Testament. They were stones, a white stone and a black stone, that the high priest carried in the pocket on the front of his robe. And they would go in and they would ask God a question. Should we do this, yes or no? Reach in and pull out a stone. White means yes, black means no. And God was controlling how they would pull the stone. But that's not exactly divination. That is something God told them to do. Divination in this time was more you killed an animal and some priest read its guts, its entrails. It was a whole lifetime of learning to learn how to read entrails and come up with the prophecies from them. It's really, how that stuff got started, I have no idea. But it was extremely common to read the entrails of animals or bones. They would do that too. Like with the Norse culture, the Celtic culture, and the Vikings, they tended to use bones that they would throw on the ground. And then some priest would read them. In the Middle East, it was almost always the internal organs of animals. Their guts, their liver, their kidneys, those kind of stuff. And we're not told what kind of divination, just divination. He says, name your wages and I'll give it. And then Jacob responds with, you had little when I came, now you got a lot. God's blessed you, and I need to provide for my own household. So he's kind of setting up for what he wants. How does God normally deal with, if he's going to send us information, he does not tell us to use divination. He sends an angel. He sends a messenger when he has some kind of message that he wants to give. Yeah, Sharon?
My grandfather used to water witch.
Yeah, that's different.
Yeah.
I can water witch.
That's not.
That's not divination. That's forces we don't exactly understand, but somehow they work.
Yeah, it did.
Right.
My grandfather was a Southern Baptist pastor and a well driller. And some guys use the forked stick.
Right.
You've seen those. I have no idea how that works, but those guys can usually find water. My grandfather took a long gas welding rod, which is the long, thin piece of metal, round, and bent a right angle on it, would hold it loosely in his hand, walk across a piece of property, and that thing would move by its own like this when you crossed either metal pipes in the ground or water.
What kind of metal was that?
Metal, just steel.
Steel.
Just steel. And he said the way you can tell if you can do it or not is you hold that out in front of you, put your hand next to it and do this, and it will push away from your hand or pull with your hand, almost like there's a force there. And I can do it. I can put my hand out and do this, and it'll move this way, pull it back, and it'll move this way.
Wow.
I personally think it has something to do with some kind of electromagnetic type of stuff, but who knows?
What about gold?
But there's nope, this is for water. Something more important than gold in the West, water.
Can't hurt to ask.
So, and I tried it on the side of my house when I was trying to find my water line because I wanted not to dig it up when I was digging a foundation for my shop.
Right.
But unfortunately, apparently, the side of my house had too many pipes and stuff because everywhere I went, it would turn and I'd dig a hole and I found an old piece of pipe from where it had propane. And also, you don't know how deep it is. It could be 600 feet down, the water, that kind of thing. So finally, I did it the old-fashioned way. I started on one end of the yard with my backhoe and just went till I yanked it out of the ground. So there it is. And that's how I find water lines.
What did you do?
I started with my backhoe and just started digging until I pulled the water line up.
Oh, I see. Okay. Got it. Yeah.
Then I knew where it was and went on about my business. So, as Debbie says, I'm the master of finding water lines the hard way. Usually water spewing up out of the ground somewhere.
You find water lines when you don't want to find them.
So, let's see. Where are we? Okay, talk about the Urim and the Thummim. So Laban says he's willing to pay Jacob whatever he asks. But of course, he plans on cheating him. And we're still dealing with two cheaters and tricksters trying to get the better of each other. Now what happens next has always been very interesting to me. Verse 31. He said, "What shall I give you?" Jacob said, "You shall not give me anything." See how Laban's wording it? I'm giving you something. Jacob immediately comes back, "No, you're not. I'm working for it. If you will do this for me, I will again pasture your flock and keep it. Let me pass through all your flock today, removing from it every speckled and spotted sheep and every black lamb, and the spotted and speckled among the goats, and they shall be my wages." So if it's got a solid coat, most of these sheep were white or a light brown, then that was Laban's. If it was not, then that was his. And normally, speckled and spotted animals were very few because these sheep have been bred for a long time. And every once in a while, those genes will pop up. But by and large, they're all, one color. And so and he also does this, you'll see in a minute. And he says that'll be his wages in verse 33. "So my honesty will answer for me later when you come to look into my wages with you." See, he knows Laban. Laban's going to try to accuse him of stealing. This way he can't, because it's obvious if he has a white sheep in his bunch, they're all speckled and spotted. So it'll make it very easy to say that's not the case. Everyone that is not speckled and spotted among the goats and black among the lambs, if found with me, shall be counted stolen. Laban said, good, let it be as you have said. But that day Laban removed the male goats that were striped and spotted, and all the female goats that were speckled and spotted, every one that had white on it, and every lamb that was black, and put them in the charge of his sons. And he set a distance of 3 days' journey between himself and Jacob pastured the rest of Laban's flock. Now, of course, this can't be unknown to Jacob. He's been taking care of these animals for years. He knows they're speckled, spotted, striped, and black animals. But when he goes out to get his animals, there's none. And they're all gone because Laban had his sons take it 3 days away where he can't find them or anything like that.
Nice guy.
These guys are something else, these two.
So this has been happening throughout mankind.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. People have been trying to cheat people since there have been people. So, all right. Laban instantly agrees, but then takes all the animals and moves them somewhere else. So I find it interesting that there's no confrontation between Jacob and Laban. You know, Jacob doesn't come, hey, wait a minute. Yesterday there were all these speckled and spotted animals and now there's none. But I think Jacob understands the situation, and I think he has a plan in mind that will come out in just a minute. And so he does it. Plus, is Jacob a man of confrontation? No, he is not. He doesn't like confrontation with his wives, with his brother Esau. He does not like confrontation. How many people do? Very few. There are some people out there that enjoy confrontation, but not many. Most of us dislike it tremendously. So, all right. So, Jacob employs his own trick, and God supports him. Verse 37. Then Jacob took fresh sticks of poplar and almond and plane trees. Now, pay attention. God's very specific here. He could have just said he took some sticks. He took some branches. But he very specifically calls out what kind of trees. You know, I've said it over and over. Pay great attention to the words. When God takes the time to be specific, that's important. It's important. And peeled white streaks in them, exposing the white of the sticks. He set the sticks that he had peeled in front of the flocks in the troughs, that is, the watering places where the flocks came to drink. And since they bred when they came to drink, the flocks bred in front of the sticks. And so the flocks brought forth striped, speckled, and spotted. And Jacob separated the lambs and set the faces of the flocks toward the striped and all the black in the flock of Laban. He put his own droves apart and did not put them with Laban's flock. Whenever the stronger of the flock were breeding, Jacob would lay the sticks in the troughs before the eyes of the flock, that they might breed among the sticks. But for the feebler of the flock, he would not lay them there. So the feebler would be Laban's, and the stronger Jacob's. Thus the man increased greatly and had large flocks, female servants and male servants, and camels and donkeys. So notice how he also expanded very quickly. It was just sheep and goats, but then because he had so many of them, he could use them to get camels and donkeys and servants and all that kind of stuff. And as God did with his forefathers, Abraham and all that, Abraham and Isaac, he blesses Jacob. And pretty soon he's very wealthy. Well, what happens to Laban? If all the animals are having speckled and spotted, what's happening to his herds?
He's getting poor.
They're getting smaller. Because it says all of them. So he takes these branches from several types of trees and peels them so they have white streaks. Now, he puts them in the water where they come to drink. And we can tell from how Jacob does it, he thinks there's like some magical thing that if they see the stripes, they have striped babies or speckled babies. Because apparently he must have observed this while taking care of them. That when branches of these trees fell in the water, that wherever that was, the animals seemed to have more speckled, spotted, and striped animals. And so he picks it up and goes off with it. I always thought it was just God kind of honoring his craziness with the animals looking at these sticks make them have spotted, striped babies. No. But there actually is a biological genetic reason for this that actually functions here. And I was very surprised this time when I went and did my studying. I went and looked at that to see if there was, and sure enough there is. They've done studies on this.
I'm sorry, I missed that biological thing.
You'll get it in a second.
Okay.
I haven't said what it is yet. That's one of the reasons I never reuse my notes. I never re-preach the same sermon. I've taught Genesis twice, and I always start from scratch. Because instead of just going over the stuff I learned before, it makes me restudy and learn new stuff. Plus, it doesn't stay in my head unless I study it the week before and then come in and teach it. I tried once in my career as a pastor to preach the same sermon over. It was the most horrible experience I've ever had in my life. And I said, I will never do that again. Some pastors can, and they do fine. They do great. I cannot. And just everybody's different. You notice I don't pay a lot of attention to my notes either. I write them, but what I say to you is usually very different than what's actually written down. It's just the writing helps get it in my head during the week. So, what do we got going on here? The main thing is to remember that he was very specific about the kinds of trees that he took the branches from and made the stripes on them by cutting them. Basically what he's doing here is he's exposing the inner part of the tree, the inside of the bark and the inside of the tree. And in a lot of trees, there are medicinal elements in there. Like the aspen tree has the same components as aspirin. If you peel the bark off of an aspen tree and take the inside of it and boil it, you'll get, what's it called? Something acid. Salicylic acid, yeah, is in the bark. And that's why it was used in the old days. And even animals seem to know it because elk and stuff will go up and eat the bark off of the tree.
Right.
And somehow they know that helps with feeling good.
Yeah,
Yeah,
a lot of that.
that type of thing. So that's kind of what he's doing. Now, it has to do with genetics. He didn't know this. I thought I'd put this up. That's an actual photo of DNA. Before we had the microscopes that could do this, it was all by inference that they came up with the fact that it was the double helix and all that kind of stuff. But now we can actually take photographs of it and see that it truly looks exactly like what we thought it looked like. So that's DNA. Now what we have here is, it seems like it's just some crazy superstition or some weird thing that he observed, but there is a gene called the agouti gene. That gene dictates whether an animal, a female, has spotted, solid colored, or striped or whatever when they're with these animals. And the question is then, what turns the agouti genes on and off? And here's how it works. If all the agouti genes are on, the animal will be solid colored and dark. If all of the agouti genes are off, it will be solid colored and light. But if some are on and some are off, it'll be speckled, spotted, or striped, is the way it works. And so what happens is, particular nutrients they have found consumed by the female is what turns these genes on and off. And guess where those nutrients are found? In the bark of the almond, the plane, and what was the other tree? I forget now. But in these trees. What was the other one? Poplar. And so what's happening is he puts it in the water. When the strong ones come to drink, that dissipates into the water, or mixes, it dissolves into the water. They drink it. That gives them other the nutrients to turn some on and some off. But when the weak ones come, he takes it out, so it's gone, and they don't. And then when the strong ones come, he puts it back again. And so it's actually a physical thing that's going on. And if it was just God doing it, that's what I always figured, it was just God doing it. Yeah. The thing is, God wouldn't have put in here the specific types of plants. He puts that in there as a piece of information for us to use to go find out that actually there is something physical and biological going on here. Something that Jacob had observed. Like I said, he's a very good husbandman with animals. He's very good at it. And he pays attention to what's going on. If you remember when he first gets here, he yells at them for not taking the flocks, watering them, and getting them out to pasture, hanging around the well all day because they couldn't get the stone off. And so you can see he's just kind of his natural inclination is to really take care of the animals. So, and he was very smart about how he did it because he only put them on the strongest there. So not only is Laban not getting many babies, but the one he gets are the weak ones, that probably don't live, that don't produce well, so on and so forth. So he's just as sneaky as Laban is. Laban's going to cheat him, but Jacob has a plan to cheat back. And off he goes. So before long, Jacob's very wealthy with all manner of animals, and guess what? Laban's not. Is this going to go well?
No.
Because Laban has sons. They see their inheritance disappearing. And they see Jacob getting richer and richer and richer. And it's only because God protected him that they didn't kill him. Because in that day and age, there's no cops around. There's no law. You could go out and kill somebody if you wanted to. The only thing you had to worry about was their relatives coming to kill you, but his relatives are far, far away. But it's because of God protecting him. Now, God is also involved here because not all females get pregnant every time they mate. And yet these do, and they have healthy, strong babies that are spotted, speckled, striped, and so on. So Laban's flocks are dwindling. So what we see here is Jacob did not really need to inherit from Isaac. Remember, he went through all that trouble to get the blessing, to get the inheritance, and cheated and lied. He didn't need to do any of that because God already had a plan. If he'd have just followed God, he was going to make him wealthy in his own right, super wealthy in his own right. He was going to transfer the same blessing that was on Isaac to Jacob. And this is what happens when we take things in our own hands. Look what happened. He ended up with a wife he didn't want and 2 wives when he should only have 1, in this conflict with Laban and all this nonsense and conflict with Esau. If he'd have just left it all alone and followed God, he would have ended up wealthy with his wife without all the nonsense. But do we do that? No, we too often go our own way and want to do things our way.
So are you saying, the past minute and a half, you've come out with so much stuff. It's like, how do you deal with it, right? Okay, so, I was going to talk about something else, but never mind. It's just so much. Sometimes when you say things, it's like, it's so much, you know what I mean? Okay, so as far as this taking different herbs and stuff like that, do you think, God created this stuff for a reason? He created everything for a reason. I don't think he just did it to let's just see what happens, throw dice. So I'm wondering if God wants us to actually consider herbology and things like that.
Well, God gave us everything. He gave us science. He gave us plants.
Instead of pharmaceuticals, of course.
And I think he gave us both. And for those online, the question was, does God give us these things and wants us to be involved in things like natural medicines and so on and so forth? Yes, God gave us both. He gave us natural medicines. He gave us pharmaceuticals. He gave us surgery. He gave us doctors. Every piece of knowledge man has ever gained came from God. That type of thing. And so God's given it all to us, and we can use it for good or evil, which we do all the time. No matter what man comes up with, somebody uses it for good and somebody uses it for evil. We can create clean power with nuclear energy. We can also kill millions of people and irradiate a country with the same energy. Just depends on how you use it. As a nuclear bomb or as a source for energy type of thing. And that's the same here. No, God, everything on the earth God gave us. And I think there's lots of things we haven't discovered yet in plants and animals and things of that nature. In fact, there was a movie a long time ago with Sean Connery where he was like this kind of crazy scientist living in South America trying to find new medical things in the plants and so on. And is that what it's called? Medicine Man. Yeah. And I still remember this. I saw this 30 years ago, I think. And he has found this compound that cures cancer. And he thinks it's in this flower. And he tries and tries and tries, and he can't replicate it. And he gets the flowers, and sometimes it works, and sometimes it doesn't. The movie goes on. But the thing is, it's actually these little ants that get in the flower that have the compound that cures cancer. Which, if I remember, I don't think he ever figures out. Which was kind of interesting. But I think that's true. I think when places like, the jungles and stuff where there's so many plants, there's probably all kinds of things that are valuable to us that we just need to discover and figure out on there. And one of the funny things to me was there's a woman that's in it too that's with him that she's getting really tired. So he gives her this compound from this plant. And it's like caffeine times 1,000. So then she's like bouncing off the walls for the next couple of days, talking nonstop and doing all kinds of crazy stuff. But it was I thought it was a great film because it shows you stuff like this, It was this ant that crawled up in the plant that actually had the compound to cure cancer, And we found a lot of things that way in nature that we later synthesize, rather than necessarily getting it from nature to make a lot of the medications that we have. Like Debbie has no thyroid. She actually gets ground up pig thyroid. is what works with her body. There's a synthetic form, but her body won't take it. It will not work. But the ground up pig thyroid will, and that works. And so we have no idea what we'll discover out there. That's the funny thing to me about modern science, is they act like they know everything there is to know, and they know nothing about anything.
Okay.
I mean, the biggest thing about science is you don't know what you don't know. Tomorrow, a discovery could be made that would turn everything upside down. That's kind of what quantum physics did. There was classical physics. We know how everything works. This is the smallest particle, blah, blah, blah. And then along comes quantum physics, quantum mechanics, and all of a sudden, it all goes out the window. And you talk to most honest physicists today, they'll tell you we really don't know anything. Because now with quantum physics, they have a particle that can be in two states at the same time. It can be on and off at the same time. Wrap your brain around that one. In our world, it's either on or it's off. These can be on and off at the same time. And they can also be in two different places at the same time. And it just drives them crazy because they can't figure any of that out. So they're still trying to figure how all that works. So, all right. Jacob didn't need to inherit from Isaac because God did exactly what he said he would do. Protect him and bless him and make him wealthy. Okay? Verse 31. Now Jacob heard that the sons of Laban were saying, Jacob has taken all that was of our fathers, and from what was our fathers, he has gained all this wealth. Well, where did that wealth come from in the first place? From them? Son's been taking care of the animals for a long time, and all they had was a few. Jacob comes along, and now they have lots. Well, it's not. You notice how we do that? We change things to justify ourselves. We do it all the time. They're not telling the truth here. They're altering it and saying, well, we were rich, and then he came and stole everything. No, they weren't. They weren't rich, not till Jacob came. And Jacob saw that Laban did not regard him with favor as before. See, Laban's not getting wealthy off of him anymore. So now he's not his big fan anymore. Then the Lord said to Jacob, return to the land of your fathers and to your kindred, and I will be with you. So before it was just Jacob wanted to go home, now God has told him to go home, and he will protect him. And the funny thing is, we'll see that Jacob kind of sort of believes him, that he'll protect him. So, over a relatively short period of time, Jacob becomes very, very wealthy. And due to all of the young of the strongest animals being spotted, striped, and speckled. So, it's obvious that somehow Jacob is doing something to make this happen, so then his sons, or Laban's sons, they pretty much want to kill him and get rid of him and take his flocks and herds and give them back to their father. So, they see this going on, and they're not very happy about it because their inheritance is slowly disappearing. Yep, you can't hardly blame them, you know. So they start to complain, but you know what happens? First you complain, then you get angry, and then you kill somebody. You know, and that's what Jesus says in the New Testament. He said, you know, if you get angry at someone and you let the sun go down, and then you get angrier and angrier, and then it ends up in murder. And Jesus said the same thing. So Jacob's smart enough to realize that pretty soon they're going to talk themselves into doing something about this problem. And he's the problem. So Laban's also angry. Doesn't look at him as helpful because he's not getting wealthy anymore. So God comes and warns Jacob, it's time to go home. Get out of here, go home. And he promises he'll be with Jacob. And he's already told him he'll protect him, provide for him. He's proved that he'll do exactly what he says. So it's time for Jacob to return to the land of Canaan. And now with the sons that he has and a couple more that are coming along, he'll begin creating the nation of Israel. It's time. So, chapter 31, verse 4. So Jacob sent and I didn't skip 1 through 3, did I?
No.
Okay. So Jacob sent and called Rachel and Leah into the field where his flock was. See, he's got to get them away from the tents. Tell them secretly what's going to happen. And said to them, I see that your father does not regard me with favor as he did before, but the God of my father has been with me. You know that I have served your father with all my strength, yet your father has cheated me and changed my wages 10 times. But God did not permit him to harm me. If he said, the spotted shall be your wages, then all the flock bore spotted. And if he said, the striped shall be your wages, then all the flock bore striped. Thus God has taken away the livestock of your father and given them to me. In the breeding season of the flock, I lifted up my eyes and saw in a dream that the goats that mated with the flock were striped, spotted, and mottled. Then the angel of God said to me in the dream, Jacob, and I said, here I am. And he said, lift up your eyes and see. All the goats that mate with the flock are striped, spotted, and mottled. For I have seen all that Laban is doing to you. I am the God of Bethel, where you anointed a pillar and made a vow to me. Now arise, go out from this land, and return to the land of your kindred. So there was what I was talking about earlier. We see that it is both a genetic thing of the nutrients in the water, but it's also God at the same time, working through those genetics while doing this. Now, what we learn here is, before, it seemed like Jacob said, give me all of the speckled, spotted, striped. If any animal was any other than that, he got him. And now, through time, though, Laban has said, well, there's way too many speckled babies. You can only have the striped ones. Well, then they all had striped babies. Well, there's too many striped ones. You can only have the black ones. Then they all had black ones. And then he was back to the speckled again. And he kept changing it. But no matter what he did, the babies came out that way. And Jacob ended up with them. So we see Laban still trying to cheat Jacob while Jacob's cheating Laban. You know, I think Jacob learned great lessons here. Having lived with this man who constantly cheated him, you know, that's who he was. And that, you know, it's very different when you're on the short end of the stick. And I think that helped a lot to mold Jacob into a man that could be the father of Israel.
I don't know what this is, and I hope you don't mind me asking. It's like, you know, when you're teaching us this stuff, right? Not only, well, for me, for anybody else, you get what's happening here, learning, but something else happens. Something else happens inside of you. It's like.
You mean the fact that he's bringing about changes in Jacob?
No, just you just get these like, bam, bam ideas and revelations and realizations. You know?
God brings those. I mean, if you've ever wondered where somebody just suddenly comes up with this astounding idea that has never existed before, where does that come from?
God.
It comes from God. Absolutely. That's where it comes from. Whether they're his people or not doesn't matter. God still gives that information to people. Because sometimes you have to wonder, how does this person come up with this idea or this thing that is totally, it is not related to anything, nothing like it exists, just out of the blue. Like the first person to come up with putting a 0 as a number. It is not intuitive to say, I need something to represent nothing. That is not intuitive. That is not something you normally think of. But yet without 0, could we do mathematics? No. One of the greatest inventions in mathematics was 0, representing nothing with something. And yet some ancient person came up with that. And you can see all kinds of things in history like that. They just seem to come out of nowhere. But God says everything that humanity has, he gave us. Everything. The intelligence to think up things, and even the insight and the ability, because a lot of those people will say, I don't even know, it just came to me. It wasn't something they figured out or they experimented, it just came to them. Okay, where'd that come from? Everything comes from somewhere. And yet that's how it happened. So, let's see. Jacob has honestly served Laban to the very best of his abilities. He has. Even though Laban has cheated him and cheated him and cheated him, he still works hard. He works all day. He takes care of the animals. He's innovative, and he does whatever's best for the animals. So for a long time, brought Laban great wealth, till he started cheating. It would have been fine if he wouldn't have tried to cheat it. If he'd have left the speckled and spotted animals in the herd and not moved them 3 days away, then I believe God would have made it balanced. But because he didn't, remember what we said earlier. What did God say to Abraham? If someone blesses you, I will. If they curse you, I will. What did Laban do? Cursed him. So what did God do? Exactly what he said he would do. He took his wealth away from him.
Wow.
And we see that over and over and over to this day. It started back then, and it's true to this day. Somebody deals harmfully with Israel, and they suffer.
Wow.
Israel may suffer too, but they suffer. I mean, have you ever found it interesting that in the same land, Israel can raise enough food to feed their entire nation and export it to Europe, and the Palestinians can't seem to raise enough food to feed anybody? Same land, same area. Yet the Israelites can do it, and they can't. And we see that all over with Israel and the things that happens with them. So, now, I already kind of talked about this, but if Laban said he would give the spotted goats, then all the young were spotted. And if Laban changed it and said, I'll give you the striped animals, then all the young were striped. And on it went. You know, at this point, you would think Laban would have figured out God was going to bless Jacob no matter what. So, hey, let's stop cheating him and see if we can turn the situation around. But it's too ingrained in him. He just keeps on doing it, trying to change his wages, and yet God keeps turning it around on him. And over time, he's taken away Laban's animals and given them to Jacob. So, God even came to Jacob in a dream or a vision, however you want to look at it, and revealed to him what he was going to do. He told him. See, Jacob didn't just come out of this from nowhere. God told him the male, they're going to have speckled, spotted, striped animals. And so then it all plays out. Now, there's an important principle we find in verse 11, where God calls Jacob by name, and what's his immediate response? Here I am. We find that in many places in the Bible, don't we? Where God calls and the person immediately responds with, here I am. Meaning, here I am, I'm ready, what do you want? We need to learn from that when God reveals to us something he wants done, what should we say? When?
No.
Immediately. Here I am, when God shows it. When does God want it done?
No.
When he shows it to you. Absolutely. And that's when you do it. Here I am. And too often in our personal lives, we're not that good at that sometimes. Because sometimes God shows us something that we don't want to do. So we kind of go, well, I'm sort of here. Anything but that. And then, of course, God doesn't do anything until we're willing to get. And I told you that happened to me, where I sent resumes everywhere but Tucson, because I wanted out of the heat so bad. And not a church responded, not even to say no. It's like I was just sending them to a shredder somewhere. All my resumes and letters and all that kind of stuff. You know. And then when I said, okay, I'll serve in Tucson, my kind and happiness there, God, within a couple of weeks I had a church. But I went through over a year of nothing, you know, and that's why. So, all right, so we find that same principle. We need to be willing to respond whenever God reveals it to us. But we also need to be careful not to do anything if God's not showing us something. That's another flip side that we get ourselves in. We go off and do stuff that God hasn't told us to do. In fact, one of the things I love about Henry Blackaby's what is his course called? I hate it. Experiencing God, is that I'm glad your guys' brains works because mine just doesn't too often. In Experiencing God, he says something that's the opposite of what we normally think. He says, don't just do something, stand there. And for us, it's the hardest thing in the world. Because the motto in America is don't just stand there, do something. But very often God says, no, just wait. Like Psalm 46, be still and know that I am God. To me, that's one of the most important verses in the Bible. Be still and know that I am God. It even goes on and says that if we're still and listening to God, somehow that will have the effect that the whole world will know he exists. Because he goes on to say that. But I think it's because if we're still and we listen, we go out and do what he wants, and then people can see that's what's going on, and on it goes. So that's what we see happening. Now, let's see. What else do we have here? He tells Jacob to return to the promised land, to Canaan, to his family. This is a big deal for Jacob because when he left, what was going to happen? Why did he leave? Esau was going to kill him. Now God says, go back. He has no idea if Esau still wants to kill him or not. But God says, go back, I'll protect you. So that's a big deal for him to make that decision. But he's kind of stuck. If he stays there, what's going to happen?
Laban's gonna happen.
Yeah, Laban's going to kill him. So it's kind of like, all right, I know I'm going to die here. I might die there, so I'll go that way. So you see how God puts him in this corner and says, you need to go.
You choose.
Yeah. So, and then he tells him, let's see. What does he say? What does he say about Bethel in there? I am the God of Bethel. That's in verse 13. I am the God of Bethel, where you anointed a pillar and made a vow to me. That's where he met God, saw God, where he really began to change, that kind of stuff. And God points out again this place, Bethel. And again, when the Bible names places, especially multiple times, that means they're important places. Because Bethel, from this time forward, becomes a place of worship for the Israelites. It's not supposed to be, but it does. In fact, when it splits into two nations, the northern kingdom of Israel, the southern kingdom of Judah, the king Jeroboam of the northern kingdom of Israel identifies Bethel as the place for them to come worship rather than Jerusalem. Because Jerusalem is still in Judah. Barely. It's just over the border. But he knows that if the people of the northern kingdom go to Israel, go to Jerusalem to go to the temple there to worship God, eventually they're going to want to migrate back to being a part of the whole nation, not split in two. So he makes a separate place and begins false worship there. And that is where the Samaritans end up worshiping, because Samaria is in the northern kingdom. That's what's going on when Jesus meets the woman at the well, the Samaritan woman, and she says, we worship here. And that's what's going on there, is those places of worship. There's more than just Bethel. There's another one that I can't remember right now, but they're places of worship which become places of false worship as time goes by. And again, we are reminded why God often with these things like these visions and miracles doesn't do very many of them, because we start to worship what? The miracle, the vision. What happens at Bethel? Jacob saw God there, and then after he sets up his little stone, from that point forward, many of the Israelites begin to worship that place. Not the God of that place, but that place. It's why I don't think we'll ever find the Ark of the Covenant. I'm not even sure it's still on the earth. Because if we did, what would happen? Millions and millions of people would worship the Ark of the Covenant. And I love all the crazy conspiracy theories and movies that have been made, that the Ark of the Covenant has this enormous power, that anybody who has it can't be defeated in battle. It's like, it's just a golden box. There's no power whatsoever other than God said. Carry it out front and you'll defeat your enemies. That's it. It's not anything intrinsic in it itself. That's what Raiders of the Lost Ark was all about. The Germans wanted the covenant so they could win World War II. The Ark of the Covenant. We would have done them absolutely no good. Only good part about that movie was when they do get it, God kills them all. That's probably the closest to reality. Because that's what he said. You touch it, and you're not a priest, and you haven't gone through the proper cleansing rituals, you'll die. And that's why this is not in the Bible, but it's in the history of Israel, that they tied bells to the bottom of the high priest's garment. Because once he went behind the Holy of Holies, no one else could go. If you went around there, you died. Instantly. You cross the threshold, you're dead. But if he didn't do his preparations right, he died. But you can't go get him. Because if you go, you die. So they tied a rope around his ankle and the bells, and they could hear him moving. And if the bells stop moving, pull on the rope. Drag his dead body out. Type of thing. So, all right, we're out of time. We need